This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 278 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's episode is a collection of stories about what happens when you say yes to invitations from local people when you travel. I love getting a chance to experience, non-touristy things, and when I'm brave enough to say yes to things, pretty much always turns into, at the very least, a memorable story, whether it's a good or bad one, as some of these stories today will, they might be borderline, but they're really, really interesting stories. So before we get to that, I just want to acknowledge the Noongar people of the Whadjuk Nation on which I'm recording this podcast today. I remember very well when I lived in Japan in particular, making a conscious decision to say yes to basically any invitation that came my way from local people. This meant I ended up going fishing in a very unusual way in a little blocked off part of a river where someone else came and put a bunch of fish into that section so it was easy to catch them, which was weird. I ended up, going to onsens for the first time, going skiing, doing that very badly. I learnt to go to karaoke with my friend's mum, who's in her 70s, and we learnt that we both loved ABBA, and then we went many times, and we would, our song, we had a song, me and the Japanese grandma, her song was ABBA's Chiquitita, and we used to always sing that together. I still think of her today every time I hear that song. So, all kinds of cool things happened. And, that just going along with things when you interact with local people, you might have no idea what to expect, but that's kind of, interesting things can happen. And those are some of the stories we're going to hear today. So my first guest is Oliver Jähnke, and Oliver has a story about a trip to Kyrgyzstan back in 2019, a few years back. And, it's an interesting story. A really quick content warning, there's some discussion at the end of this of some animal treatment that might not be usual for your culture. Nothing awful, but it's a bit unusual. So here is Oliver's Kyrgyzstan experience.
I went to Kyrgyzstan for a couple of weeks for a summer break. I don't know. It was so cool. And I got invited to stay with a family there, a local family, and they... I helped them around the house a little bit with ironing their sheets, and I painted some things in the garden and stuff like that. And they were so nice to me, and they were the best. And they heard that I was really into horses. I've been riding since I was a very little kid, and I've worked a lot with horses as well, and volunteered with horses a bit as well. So, so we talked a little bit about that, and then they said I have a relative who works with horses here in Kyrgyzstan. I could see if they would invite you for a couple of days. And I was like, yes, please. Wow. So they did. And I went to visit their relatives to meet with them. And I had no idea what to expect. They were managing some kind of tourism business for horse treks in the mountains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But I just went there to visit them and didn't know what to expect. And I got there and they were like, oh, so tomorrow we're bringing our horses down from the spring pasture. Would you want to come? And again, I was like, yes, please. Exactly. So they were like, okay, so you can pack up some warm clothes and rain clothes. And I was like, okay, but it's 30 degrees outside and the sky is completely blue.
Yeah, this is your summer holiday. Yeah.
Exactly. So I had no idea what to expect, but we went to their stables in the morning and they just had a few horses down there. So we picked up 4 horses and we put the saddle and bridle on them. And then we put them inside of a truck, and it was not a truck made for horses. It was just a very regular truck. Right. And it was really, really weird, and just tied them up in there. And we were, 5 people in the front of the truck on 2 seats. Me and the dad of the company and three Kyrgyz shepherds. So we were in the front of this truck, and we started like going on very like rural streets, not streets, just like paths, and it was very, very uneven, and you could hear the horses going like in the back because they had nothing to like lean against. It was
nothing to hold on to, so to speak. Yes.
Yeah. And
God.
then we just stopped in the middle of nowhere, and we just like took out the horses and set up, and then we just started riding like up a hill, and it was like, okay, so where are we going? And the thing was that the owner of the company stayed behind, so it was just me and these three Kyrgyz shepherds, and one of them spoke like a few words of English. So communication wasn't perfect. But they said like, yeah, up in the forest, and I could see the forest just a couple of like 100 meters ahead of us. So I was like, okay, not too bad. Still very, very steep. I had never seen a horse go like up that steep before, especially not with me on the back. But like we went up there, and then we went through the forest, and then up, and the paths were so narrow, and on the side was just a cliff. And
I'd be so scared.
Yes, it was really scary. And we rode for maybe 2 hours straight up, and then we took a little break, and we had some lunch, and they said, oh, so now we've reached 3,000 meters, and that's taller than the highest mountain in Sweden. So I said that, and they thought I was pretty funny.
Oh my gosh.
Continued up for 2 more hours, and then we were like up to 3,500 meters, and then I understood the warm clothes because it had started snowing.
Snowing. Not just that it got colder, it started snowing. Right. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, this is a crazy journey.
It was such a crazy journey, and especially since I didn't know what to expect in the morning, right? I had no idea what I was going to experience. But we came up to this like mountain, like a valley, very, very close to the highest peak, and there were just 33 horses grazing there in the wild, and we rode around them and started herding them down, and then we had to be really fast because they would go all. We had to lead the way, and but also push them from the back. So we did that all the way down.
They're not like sheep. They don't like follow the way a sheep would, right?
Not really. Yeah. And also they had been wild up in the mountains for, I don't know, weeks or months, and now suddenly they were like getting used to people again.
Yeah,
so I imagine that they were like kind of pissed at us for taking them down.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're herding them down the mountain? And so then you're going down a steep mountain, right?
Yes. And when I realized that, no, I was like, that's so much scarier than going up.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And I realized, oh my gosh, we have to go back down again. I started regretting coming a little bit. I didn't. It was amazing, but still, I'm like,
there was a bit of anxiety involved, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
So after 5 hours, we were back at the stables, and we all survived, and all the horses were with us. But then one of the horses that we had been riding like went down and got like a colic, which is like really dangerous for horses. Like a lot of horses die from that.
Yeah.
And so these 4 shepherds, they like took down the horse and held its legs and held the head, and they poured like 1 liter of some liquid down its throat. And I asked them like, what is that? Is it some kind of medicine? And they were like, it's pure vodka.
No.
Yes. And I was like, sorry, vodka? Yes, works for people, works for horse. So after they poured that like 1 liter down, they made the horse stand up, and then they chased him around the field like 1 or 2 times, and then we just left. And I was like, aren't we going to check that the horse is okay? And they were like, nah, he'll be fine tomorrow.
He'll be hungover tomorrow.
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible. What an experience.
It really was, yes.
Saying yes to the local suggestions in Kyrgyzstan certainly gave Oliver a once-in-a-lifetime experience and a quite amazing story to tell. So from Kyrgyzstan, we're moving to China, and here's Nathan Thomas to tell us about one of his experiences there with just saying yes.
I was living in Chengdu in Sichuan province about almost 10 years ago, just when I was fresh out of university. And I made a couple of local friends there. It wasn't that hard to do because my university was a kind of a second-tier institution, and there weren't a lot of international people, and those who were there were kind of objects of fascination. And someone about my age from my university invited me to their village for the weekend. It was for a Chinese festival, not Chinese New Year. I can't remember which particular festival it was. It might have been Chungjia, a spring festival, but a nice one, but that is not like of the same echelon as Chinese New Year. And
right.
it was really quite something. So it was a train, it was a bus, and then it was a lift with a member of her family. It was the granddad grabbed a live chicken and lopped off its head in the garden for dinner. I was the first foreigner that many of the kids there had ever seen.
Wow.
It was really, and then the uncles all tried to kill me with fierce local beer, served in bowls. Like they would get the can of beer, they would pour it into a soup bowl, and then they would drink it all in one go. And I was obviously encouraged to do likewise. And so all the layers of culture, from the festival to the food to the weirdest way of drinking beer that I've ever seen. And I went to the University of Otago. We're kind of experts there. So, and all of that combined into quite something. And it is one of those travel experiences where at the time you're kind of thinking, what have I gotten myself into? But then a few years later, your mind keeps going back to it and being like, that was really quite something.
I feel like beer in a soup bowl is something I need to know more about. I guess you can drink it faster, perhaps? I'm not sure. Anyway, that was Nathan's experience in China. And all of it comes from just accepting an invitation from a local person and seeing what happens. Now, in our final story today, I'm chatting with Sophia Bentaher, and she said yes while hitchhiking in Bulgaria.
The travel story that I tell over and over, it's become a good dinner party companion, is the time that I had dinner with a communist Nazi in Bulgaria. I know. The
Sounds
cringe.
crazy.
And obviously beyond my personal inclinations, like my personal political inclinations, it is one of those stories where, so the context was my university friend and I were hitchhiking across Europe to go learn a traditional cake recipe in each country. And yeah, and so we were just on this kind of insane quest for desserts, and also on basically no budget, and just essentially having to sleep in whoever would be willing to be a host. And in this situation in Bulgaria, we kind of found ourselves in a tricky sunset situation where for hitchhikers, you don't really want to be on the street at night because visibility, people can't see you. Just, I don't know, the nighttime brings an increased risk of danger, I suppose. So at sunset, it had come sunset, and we were on this like little countryside road. And I'll fast forward through this part of the story because the whole story's on its own. But we just kind of climbed into a car with a stranger who invited us to come to his cabin in the mountains. Like, I feel like it's the tagline of what you teach kids at school: don't go into a stranger's car to go to a cabin in the woods.
It does sound like an extra level of danger, doesn't it? But
right, I know. And I remember when he offered it, he was really like, well, girls, I can't take you to Plovdiv, which was the city we were trying to get to. It's like, but it's getting dark and I'm going to my cabin in the woods, so you can come with me if you want. And I just remember thinking, this is the moment in horror movies where you say no. But we said yes. And so fast forward to 2 nights later, this person was an amazing host. It turned out he had a very, very luxurious cabin. It was not a cabin, it was a mansion in the woods.
Wow.
And
nice.
So the second night he was like, girls, come with me I'm having dinner with my friend. This is a tiny Bulgarian mountain village. There's barely anybody, just beautiful homes. And so he's like, I'm going for dinner to my friend's house and you should come with me. So of course, what else? We're with our host. We go along, we tag along. We walk into this restaurant. So it's again, mountain-esque. It's like log cabins, and we get in, and the first thing that happens when we walk into the space is there are you might have to correct my English on this, but there's dead stuffed. It's like taxidermy animals. There's just animals everywhere. There's like a gazelle. There's a little bobcat. There's deer. It's a zoo. I don't actually like living zoo, so imagine a dead zoo. It's not working for me, right?
Not pleasant at all.
I know. I walk in and I'm like, okay, well, interesting choice of decor. And it turns out, no, well, me neither. And it turns out it was just so myself, my friend Annabelle, that I was traveling with, our host, Matteo, and who introduces us to his friend, who's, I think his name was Andon. Don't quote me on the name, but essentially his friend. And his friend doesn't really speaks a very, very broken English, but so our host starts becoming the translator. And very quickly, and well, obviously he asks for the context. We tell him that we're hitchhiking, we've come from France, and he starts making comments about like French socialism and our political choices as a country. So, and we're obviously there's a first context. We're two girls, younger girls, with these two men in a cabin, like in the mountain in Bulgaria. So we can't be as maybe outspoken as we want to, because
be
simply, and we had to be aware of that. Like, what's going to happen if I get in tiff 10 minutes in? Like, I'm not in a
I can't just run out and
no. Yeah. So I'm kind of listening, and I think that forced me, like that context forced me to a place of having to be an active, like to listen, right, instead of just reacting directly to being like, well, you don't like my country. I had to actually practice. Okay, I'm going to listen to this person and see, and just take the information for what it is, and not spiral it into a conflict. So we start talking politics. He makes a comment about how there's there's a big Jewish community in France. And at some point, again, mind you, this is being translated as it goes by our host. He says something along the lines of Hitler was a good guy. And so I'm just like, oh dear.
And when your host translates this, does he kind of seem to agree, or is he's translating straight?
Yeah, he's just translating. He's just full on like not getting involved in the actual conversation, but just very simply translating. Right? Like, I'm not getting involved. I'm just serving my purpose here.
Yep.
And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, what is going on? Because again, I can't just smile and be like, yeah, totally, I agree. No, I don't agree. And to me, it's appalling to hear that. And I think this is where the second context is important. They were being fantastic hosts because we had told them that we were traveling to learn about cake and food. And this is something that Anthony Bourdain used to really try to explain, and that I loved. It's like, if you want to get to know a stranger, share a meal with them, because there's a connection. He is actively feeding us. This restaurant, by the way, was not a functioning restaurant. He just had it as part of his portfolio of real estate, and he was like, the restaurant is making a loss, but I like it, so I just keep it open and invite my friends. So we're like, what?
Wow.
And so we had gone through a few meals, and we had started talking about desserts very briefly before we had gotten into the politics. So he says this line about Hitler, and then while I'm kind of just sitting receiving that information, he just goes like, he just tells something, and he's like, you need to try the blueberry pancakes. And as I'm digesting literally intellectually what he's just said, he screams out to the kitchen, and he's just like, Anya, blueberry pancakes or something, or well, in Bulgarian. And I remember just being there like, what is actually going on? Because here's the thing, in my day-to-day life, I live across like LA, New York, Paris, like these cities that are fairly globalized, and where I think there's some kind of like, we like to think that we're the progressives of the world, whatever. I would never come across or at least with somebody who's leading with that belief so strongly.
So openly at first contact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I just had to come to a place where I was like, I want to understand why this person is saying this, because I can shut down right now and just be like, pout and go to the side of the room and, yell at him. And I can get confrontational about it, or I can try to understand his perspective, although I don't agree with it. And I think that was a really important lesson for me, to think I don't need to agree with the person, but I can still choose or be curious in understanding why he's saying what he's saying and where he's coming from. So we started asking questions and just being like, okay, strong statement. Can you develop? And through that, we just understood the context. These were men who, they were in their mid 40s, and they had grown up in countries that were very communist. And it was just like, it was fascinating to see how, based on where you've grown up and the ideas that are around you, you shape your understanding of the world. And so for them, like capitalism was definitely the new, just like, I guess our biggest issue as a species. And then Hitler to them had protected his country, right? It was this very like hero take on this character. And what I will say is that because I led with questions and gave him space to explain his perspective, he then started asking us questions. And we then, in our, young 20-year-old naive women, I say naive in a neutral way, it's not necessarily a critique, but we were able to explain to him how we thought that, he was a very hurtful character, and just our view of the world, and believing that. So we were able to just defend our position around,
and maybe educate him a little bit, at least make him think.
Listen,
which ordinarily wouldn't happen. Who knows? But
and
if you just had fought back immediately and said, "But," then everyone just gets defensive, and
right,
there's no hope at all. Whereas perhaps, you never know, he might have stopped to consider that there are other possibilities to his opinion. But
and it was very much a moment where I had a moment of like, I realized that I could still stand by my beliefs and still stay open and in connection with the person in front of me, despite them having a completely different experience and view of the world.
Sophia learnt a really important and valuable lesson about tolerance, and I'm not sure that I've learnt that as well as she has. I need to work on that, I think. It's hard to have a good, sensible, or not sensible perhaps, a good, honest-ish discussion, but still civilised with someone when you completely disagree with their beliefs. And sounds like because of the circumstances, she had to do a good job of that, and that's a really good lesson. So that was a very intriguing story of what can happen when you're just saying yes to things that locals suggest. So I hope those stories have given you some entertainment and some food for thought, all in one. Thank you so much to the guests for their stories for episode 278. First of all, a big thanks to Oliver Jähnke. Oliver has a fabulous YouTube channel called Queers of the World, and lots of interesting videos there. Oliver's been travelling around, meeting up with queer communities in many parts of the world. I've got some more stories from him soon. Also, thanks to Nathan Thomas. His website is at theintrepidtimes.com, and he's got a book out, Travel Your Way, Rediscover the World on Your Own Terms, which of course is pretty well aligned to my ideas. And lastly, I chatted with Sophia Bentaher, and her website is at sophia-b.co. Of course, you can see all of these links and more at the show notes. For this episode, the show notes are at notaballerina.com/278. Don't forget to check out our groups. We've got a Facebook group and a LinkedIn group, both called Thoughtful Travellers. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers on Facebook or LinkedIn and ask to join. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.